Hello, today we'll be looking at installing VMware vCenter 8. So this is also called VCSA. Specifically what it is a virtual machine that gets added to your vSphere environment, and it will actually run multiple hosts. So if you want to manage at a larger scale, so if you don't have a single server, single host specifically, I'm not talking about VMs here, about physical hosts, well, you probably want to install the vCenter server. So the way we do that is to get the ISO and to proceed with the installation. There's a few tricks along the way, so we'll take a look at that. Now, the latest version 8.0a, as of course this recording, and this will go every month and a half, every few months you'll get a new version. Sometimes they come out because of security concerns. This one, I know the A has something that it changes for security reasons. Now there's from a functionality point of view, there's a bit of a change from 7 to 8. You'll see the look and feel is a little different, but overall it keeps being the same old management console that you're used to. And even though, you know, the graphics are a little different, you're still going to be comfortable if you've used 7.0. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, you can always go to the websites and read the release notes or change logs for those of you who are more technical, and you can always see what the new versions bring. Once it is installed, you can go into this vCenter and get it to update itself. That's a whole different subject, and you could look, I believe we have a video on that for version 7, but it is essentially the same thing. There's an update button on there that you can go, and it will retrieve the latest upgrades, and you can take a look to see how it affects it. Now, occasionally when you do upgrading things in the future, it will restart. I think I'd be good to give a little note on there. When you do that, the vCenter, once it's installed, once it does manage a bunch of hosts, can be upgraded, can be restarted without affecting the hosts, meaning that if you have a bunch of virtual machines, you have some environment perhaps that runs 24/7, the last thing you want to do is risk turning anything off or rebooting, especially if you've got people working around the world, for example, that are accessing things. You don't want to pull the plug on anything at any moment, especially not if it's unplanned and it's a surprise. So if the vCenter, the only thing that it would affect, I shouldn't say the only thing, I mean, one of the examples is the backups. For example, if you're using the vCenter, you're using Veeam to back up, and it's connecting to the vCenter as opposed to the direct host. Obviously, while you're rebooting, it's not available. That might trigger something. So, but it's very limited in effect, to my knowledge. Of course, if you have monitoring applications, if you have any of those things, they would be subject to being affected or triggering alarms and so forth if you restart a vCenter. But that aside, from a user point of view, if you've got database running, Microsoft SQL, whatever it is, in a VM, it's going to keep working, not affected by this. So I thought I'd make that very clear. By the way, if you like these videos, please give us a thumbs up, and of course subscribe. That really helps out a small channel like ours, and we so appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the people who send in their comments and so forth below. I do read those, and I do try to respond to them in timely fashion. Always appreciate all the ideas for other videos as well. So let's jump right into it. So what I've done is logged into the machine here. So what I have is I have two machines, two hosts, and they're both pretty much the same. They're both running on Dell R640s, and I've got a bit of storage inside of each one. Nothing huge, nothing very complicated. In this one, I've gone out of my way and I've created a basically a second NIC here, and I've gone ahead and created another port group, and so I've got another virtual switch that I've called vSwitch. So again, this is not going to affect any of this. I'm just trying to give you a bit of a heads up. I've got no virtual machines in here, and I'm going to be using this really just for testing and just to show you around the new version 8. So let's go ahead, since the point here is to install it. So I've got my host IP address, DHCP on there. So by the way, usually you want to make sure that is a static IP address. So what I've got is the ISO right here, if you can see it here on the side. And the ISO, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right, and I'm going to click on mount, and what that will do is it will bring me up let's do this here. So this will bring me here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the user interface. So go here, go to Windows 32, and there's the installer, and that's all there is to it. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, thank you for that. But specifically, if you've watched any of my VCSA or vCenter videos, one of the things that I usually say is make sure that you have a DNS server active in the environment, because it will make the installation a lot easier and so forth. Now, one of the things that you can do if you don't have a DNS server is you can cheat a little and you can use the host file. So the host file is under, let's see, it's under Windows System 32 drivers etc, and you have a file called hosts in there that you can go and add an IP address and the name of the machine. So let's see if we can pull this off today. So I'm going to click on install, and really all install does is it pops this up. So let's go ahead and close a few things to get less distraction. So what we want to do today is we want to do an installation, and really we're just following through this wizard. It's quite simple, and we're going to go ahead and say next, and it's going to say okay, accept, yes, and now it's going to ask us for the name of the ESXi host. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the one that I just was logged into, and in my case I'm going to put in the password. So I'm going to say, okay, untrusted, that's fine in this case. This is a lab environment, so I can certainly get away with not worrying about too many of the things on there. Now, we're going to give it a name. Usually what I do is I call it VCSA, let's say 8. Or actually, you know what? That should actually match whatever it is that you put in your host file. So here's one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the host file. Just give me a moment here. I'm going to bring that up to show you what's in my host file. Okay, so my host file has this right now, so VCSA 8, and I'm pointing it to an IP address. Now, I did this prior so that, again, I don't have a DNS server running right now because I've got no VMs, I have no Windows server, I have no Linux servers, I have nothing right now. So this brand new lab environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this information here. Now you're going to have to set a root password. Do keep in mind that the root password expires after 90 days. I do have another video on that if you ever find out too late that you didn't change your passwords in time and it locks you out. So please be sure to watch that on how to recover that in case it gets lost. So I'm going to go ahead and make up a password for this. And of course, do write it down somewhere, hopefully somewhere encrypted, so that you do remember. Now, this is how much space this will consume. So in case you thought, hey, this is going to be really small, you can't run this off a USB key, you can't run this off an SD card. You really need to have enough room, because you'll see even at the tiny, look at the memory that it takes. So gone are the days that you want to have a very minimal machine running a whole bunch of stuff at this point. So from storage point of view, it's 580 gigs, and this again is how many VMs you can hold and how many hosts. So in our case, we're going to have 3 hosts for some of our lab work here, and so the tiny is fine, and you can see how that starts to get quite large compared to, I mean, if you're going to go back all the way back to, version 5, let's say, the vCenter used to be very small, and it's just growing with time. So I'm just going to go ahead and do next. Where does it want to send it? Here. And this is how much free space I have, so I'm good. Now, if I want to, I could use thin disk mode. What that will do is it will not pre-allocate the space to the VM, or in this case, to the vCenter. And so I'm going to go ahead and select this. So we're not installing it on a cluster. We're not doing anything fancy. So we're just going to go ahead and do next. And this is where I get, okay, so I can select VM network. That's already predefined. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an IP. Well, usually you want to put in a static IP. In this case, we do. Okay, so here we go. And we're going to go ahead and give it the address that we just saw here. So I need this to match. So it's 255.255.255.0, and the default gateway. Again, this is a lab environment, and this is where I've got a DNS server. So I don't actually have a DNS here, but that should work. Just check there's nothing below. Next, and if we don't have a DNS or we don't have an entry in the host file, this is where it would fail. So it's basically going to go through various stages, and without the DNS at some point it just kind of fizzles out and gives you an error. I don't remember the error offhand, but a lot of the problems can be solved if you have a DNS server. Go ahead and say continue. Stage 2, we're setting it up. Next, okay, time synchronization. These are, depending on what you're going to be doing from a functionality point of view, you might want to have the SSH enabled at first if you want to use, go in, type in some commands, for example, do anything fancy. We're going to leave that off. For security reasons, leave it off. If you ever need to have SSH access on, turn it on, use it, and turn it back off. That's the ideal situation. Time synchronization, I mean, you could basically put in an NTP here. Usually I put this in. Since it's just a lab environment, we're just going to leave that off, but I would suggest putting that in if it's going to be used for any length of time. Let's go ahead and next. So here we go. So single sign-on, what we're going to do is we are going to give it a name. So administrator, I'm actually going to leave it to vSphere.local. Now this is, again, a test environment. We need to put in a password, a lot of different passwords. Now this is a different password from the root password. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say next. And since this is a lab, I'm going to use off. Here's my information, and we're going to do next. Click OK, and we wait yet again. So doing this entire process, maybe I should have said this on the onset, is probably going to take you, I don't know, I'm at 30 minutes right now, and we're not done. So eventually 45 minutes to an hour. To get this up and running, and that's if you've already got DNS set up and you already have all these answers ready. But it's not too hard. I think you'll find that apart from the waiting aspect, which is a little slow, but I think overall it's not too hard of a process to get this up and running. So there we go. We have successfully done stage 2, and what it shows us now is how to get into it. So you'll notice here that there is basically the right IP address on the bottom, and it's port 443. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and go right into it. Now you have to click on advanced and on save. And here we go. This is going to be our first look of the new vCenter. So let's go ahead and log in. Try not to get our hopes up too high that this will be. So we said vCenter.local, I believe I left that, and make sure that this works. Now, of course, we won't have anything connected to it yet, so we'll have to do that. See what this looks like. Excitement here. Okay, you have some alarms. There's nothing running on here. All right, so I have no licenses in here, of course. I mean, that'd be something you would do. And if we go here, there is nothing below it, so we can go ahead and, by the way, so yeah, always make sure that you've got the latest build. If you're going to set it up, get the latest and greatest while you're doing it. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and take a quick look around. I mean, there's really nothing in here. So under configuring, this is where you go into licensing and you would put in your information there. If you don't, then at some point, as of this writing, like what, 60 days later, 59 days, you will have a surprise where things will just stop working. So put that in, and let's take a look. So there's no host, there's nothing on here. So what we want to do is we want to go here, right click, see, and we're going to click, and we're going to create a new data center. Since this is brand new, there's nothing in here. So we're going to have to start from the beginning. So create a data center, which we will have to call, well, I can call it data center. That's fine. Okay, so now I have a data center. All right, so now I'm starting to have the ability to go and add hosts. If we wanted to, and we wanted to have clustering, or we want to have something else. In fact, I think since I've not done this before, but if we had just a host, we would just click on host and you would type in the information. We're going to go ahead and install, or rather connect this to some hosts. So you right click, you say add hosts right here, and go ahead and type in the IP address of the one that we are currently on. 137, I believe, is the one that we are currently on, and there's a period there, I just noticed. Okay, do next. It's going to ask you for the username and the password, so we're going to go ahead and do this. Type in root and the password. Now it's going to store certificate, yes, and it's showing us which version it's running on Dell. Okay, do next. Now we don't have a license, so we're just going to skip this for 60 days. Lockdown mode, I'm going to leave this off. Location, well, there's only one data, so there's literally just here. So add to complete, finished, and now we have one host connected. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to connect a second host, and just to show you, 139 is the other one. So we're going to go ahead and do next, and let's go ahead and type this in. I don't think I typed this in properly again. All right, next, yes, next. And there are no virtual machines in here, so of course there's really nothing too exciting. If you go in here, I mean, there's nothing else to select. Just do ready and do finish, and now you should get two of them. Here are my two hosts, and again, they are, well, one of them has this VCSA installed, the other one has nothing. So this is what it looks like, and at that point we could go and manage things and see some information. So if you wanted to, see some information, performance point of view, this is what it looks like. It's pretty responsive. I mean, it's showing no alarms. You could go allocate things. You can see the health. So there's lots of, there's no, well, actually there is a VM here. You can click on VM and you can see our VM. Click on it here, and then you can see information on that VM. And that's roughly what it looks like. So we have successfully installed VCSA, also known as vCenter, and as you can see here, this manages multiple hosts. Now keep in mind, if you have something like an essential version, then this vCenter, if it had that license, would only be able to control 3 physical hosts. Now keep in mind that each host, depending on the size of your machine, of course, how many processors, cores and so forth, how much RAM and disk space, you could have multiple virtual machines underneath here. In fact, this is traditionally what happens, and the reason why people do this is to be able to optimize the hardware. So then you would have them here. Now we'll have the other abilities once we set this up, meaning that at some point, if we wanted to, we could do things like, migrate the machine from one to the other, so from one physical host to the other, and so forth. So that's about it in a nutshell. This is what it looks like. You can look at your different data stores. You can look at your VMs, your networks. There's only one data center. It shows you 2 hosts. There's only one VM for the whole thing. Apart from that, have folders, which we're not going to use here. From a configuration point of view, this is where you can go and modify certain things. If you did not put, for example, the NTP, the time server, you could go and add this now if you needed to. You could also, from security settings, make sure that you turn off any services that you do not require for a security point of view. If it's not in use, like SSH, for example, turn it off. It'll make your life so much easier. And it's showing here some plugins. Last but not least, the only thing I'll mention as well is this update here, where you could go in here and basically check to see if there are updates on there and apply them as required. So it is a good practice to keep these up to date. I usually wait a little bit when it comes off, unless I'm aware of something so monumentally wrong from a utilization point of view, like something will hit purple screen or blue screen, just stop, in other words, on you, then I would probably go ahead and apply it. Usually I've got a test server, that's why I've got these labs, and I would test them out first. The other thing is, from a security point of view, if you know there's a breach, I've seen a huge breach a while ago. An IT firm called me up and wanted my assistance because they had multiple physical hosts that were all hacked into. To be fair, those were all still running 5 point something, which someone somewhere should have decided to update to a more recent version. But that aside, the point is when you find out that there are some security breaches on certain versions, either because a service has been left open and there's a bug in that service and someone's figured out how to get into it, while you may need to apply that patch, that security update very quickly, that is a very valid reason to do so. On the flip side, sometimes, and if you go and look at the different builds for the version 7, for example, you will see that there's a couple of builds from VMware that were pulled, that were taken back, that were, basically taken right off because they had a major bug. And it took a little while for the bug, in some cases, to materialize, like i.e., you reboot a couple times and all of a sudden the machine won't reboot. That can be a huge problem and a game changer. If you've got an environment where you run 24/7, you can't afford to have that. And what's unfortunate with some of these problems is sometimes it will take days for someone to figure out there's a major problem with a release. So I guess in theory, I like to be prudent. I like to do my own testing. And I like to wait a little bit to see, how it reacts, and if there's anything in the forums, and if I hear of any problems with the updates, because sometimes it does break something, unfortunately. Sometimes they hurry out these updates, because they have to plug something, there's a hole somewhere, and their rush to do so might break something else. It's not usually the problem. I mean, these are very stable in general, so they are the exception to the rule, but still. So I'm Bob Pellerin, CTO Bob. I hope this was informative and useful to some of you out there. If it was, leave some comments below, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe this video. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You can also visit us at www.ctobob.com, and we're so appreciative. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.